My name is Tiffany Hatch, and I'm 28 years old. Everything finally blew up a few weeks ago. But the truth is, this story started 7 years earlier, on the day my grandmother died. She was the one steady presence in my life growing up. Calm, fair, predictable, in a way my own household never was. When she passed, it felt like the last adult who truly saw me as my own person was gone. In her will, she left her house to me and my younger sister Addison, split evenly, 50% each, no conditions, no loopholes, no family discretion. Just a clean legal line on paper. At the time, I was 21, still in university, juggling classes, a part-time job, and student housing. Addison was 18, finishing high school. Our mother, Erica, had been living with Grandma for the last few years of her life, helping take care of her, so when Grandma passed, nothing really changed on the surface. Mom stayed in the house, Addison stayed in the house. I didn't. I moved between dorms, then cheap rentals after I graduated. At the time, the arrangement felt fair. Logical, even. I didn't need the house, and I wanted to help. The agreement was simple. Mom and Addison could live there rent-free, and in return, they'd cover the basics: property taxes, utilities, upkeep. I never asked for a dime. I never pushed for rent. I thought that was what family did. My father had left when we were kids, so Mom raised us alone. I always believed our relationship was decent. Not especially close, not hostile, just functional. I never imagined I was quietly being placed into a role, the responsible one, the fallback, the one who would always figure it out. When I graduated at 22, I set one goal and built my entire life around it. I wanted my own place. For 6 straight years, I lived like my life was on pause. I worked overtime whenever it was offered. I skipped vacations. I didn't upgrade my car. I wore clothes until they were threadbare. I packed my lunch every day. Every spare dollar went into savings. Friends traveled, friends upgraded, friends moved on. I stayed focused. I kept picturing one thing, keys in my hand. A door that closed behind me. Earlier this year, it finally happened. A modest 2-bedroom apartment, $200,000. Nothing flashy. Safe neighborhood. Short commute. Mine. Signing those papers felt unreal. I painted the walls myself, bought secondhand furniture, slept on a mattress on the floor the first week and didn't care. I had earned this. I officially moved in about 8 weeks ago. That's when the tone shifted. My mother and sister had always had opinions about my money. If I mentioned a bonus, Mom would immediately suggest something for Grandma's house. Addison would text asking to borrow money, small amounts, but constant. I usually gave in, just to keep the peace. Then Addison started dating Walt. About a year later, he moved into Grandma's house too. No steady job. Lots of plans. Ever since then, the requests got more frequent. Bills, repairs, emergencies. I started pushing back, pointing out that there were now 3 adults living there. Mom always sounded disappointed, like I was failing some invisible test. Then Addison announced she was pregnant. Mom was thrilled. Over the moon. I congratulated my sister. I assumed they'd stay in the house or eventually find their own place, like most couples do. No one said otherwise. About a month after I finished moving into my apartment, Mom called and said we needed a family meeting. She insisted it was important. When I walked into the living room, Mom, Addison, and Walt were all sitting there, and a chocolate cake was on the coffee table. That should have been my warning. Mom talked about sacrifice, about family duty, about doing the right thing. Then she smiled, like she'd solved a puzzle. She told me the solution. I should give my apartment to Addison and Walt. I could move back into Grandma's house. When I said no, she threw the cake at me. That was the moment everything became clear. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I stood there with chocolate frosting sliding down my shirt, crumbs stuck in my hair, staring at my mother like I was seeing her for the first time. No, I said again, calm, steady. That's not happening. For a split second, the room went silent. Then it detonated. My mother's face twisted, red and tight. The sweetness in her voice vanished like it had never existed. She started shouting about how selfish I was, how I'd always been selfish, how I'd forgotten where I came from. She said they had let me benefit from Grandma's house for years, like she hadn't been living there rent-free in a property I co-owned. Addison burst into tears, loud, heaving sobs. "I can't believe you don't care about me," she cried, one hand pressed dramatically to her stomach. "About your nephew. How can you do this to us?" Walt finally spoke up, shaking his head like he was disappointed in me. Honestly, Tiffany, I thought you were better than this. That one almost made me laugh. I reminded them, again, that Grandma's house was a 3-bedroom home, that they already had a stable place to live, and that my apartment was mine. I had bought it with my money, my sacrifices, my years. My mother didn't hear a word of it. She screamed that I was ungrateful, that I owed Addison, that I was supposed to give because I had more. She even dragged religion into it, talking about Christian duty, despite us never being religious growing up. I grabbed a napkin, wiped the cake off my face, and said the conversation was over. As I walked toward the door, they all yelled at once. My mother shouted that if I walked out, I wasn't her daughter anymore. Addison screamed that I was going to make her lose the baby from stress. Walt muttered that this was low. I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I drove home with the smell of chocolate still clinging to me and sat alone in my apartment, shaking with anger. Then my phone started ringing. Mom, Addison, again and again. I didn't answer. The voicemails were brutal. Long, rambling messages about betrayal, about family, about how I was tearing everything apart. Addison sent shorter text, emotional, pointed, manipulative. You're hurting your nephew. I hope you're happy. She even sent me a picture of the ultrasound with the message, "This is who you're hurting." Then the extended family joined in. Aunts I barely spoke to, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all repeating the same story, clearly fed to them by my mother. I was rich now. I was heartless. I was abandoning my pregnant sister. No one mentioned that Addison had been living rent-free in a house I co-owned for years. When I tried explaining, I was talked over. Family comes first, one aunt snapped. That was when I stopped trying. I sent one final message to my mother and sister. My decision about my apartment is final. Your behavior, especially the cake incident and the ongoing harassment, is unacceptable. Do not contact me about this again. It only made them angrier. The messages kept coming. I started blocking numbers, one by one. My sleep suffered. My anxiety spiked. And then, slowly, painfully, something became clear. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. And resources don't get boundaries. That realization snapped something inside me. A week later, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Walking into the lawyer's office felt surreal, like I was betraying some unspoken rule just by being there. I almost turned around twice. But once I sat down and started talking, everything poured out. My grandmother's will, the years of rent-free living, the apartment demand, the cake, the harassment, the guilt, the way my own family seemed convinced I was obligated to give up my life for theirs. The lawyer listened without interrupting. Then he opened the file and said something that changed everything. You and your sister own the house 50-50. If you can't agree, you have the legal right to force a sale. He explained something called a partition sale. If co-owners can't reach an agreement, a judge can order the property sold and split the proceeds evenly. No feelings, no guilt, just law. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. There was an exit. My lawyer sent a formal letter to Addison. Polite, firm. It stated my intent to sell my share and offered her the chance to buy me out at fair market value, around $175,000 to $200,000. 30 days to respond. We didn't expect her to accept, and she didn't. What we did receive was a handwritten letter from my mother, pages long, furious, accusing me of greed, betrayal, and trying to make a pregnant woman homeless. She demanded I stop this legal nonsense immediately. When the deadline passed without a response from Addison, my lawyer filed the partition lawsuit. That's when things became real. A process server delivered the court papers to Grandma's house. Addison was officially served. The panic on their side was immediate. My mother called my lawyer's office repeatedly, screaming at his assistant, accusing him of helping me destroy the family. Addison scrambled to get legal aid. Her lawyer tried to delay everything, arguing that she was pregnant, that she had low income, that I should be forced to sell my share cheaply, or allow payments over many years. My lawyer shut it down. The law doesn't work that way, he told me calmly. For me, something unexpected happened. Relief. All communications stopped going through me. Everything went lawyer to lawyer. My phone went quiet. The pressure lifted. For the first time since the cake hit my chest, I wasn't being emotionally attacked anymore. I was just waiting. The legal process dragged on far longer than I expected. Weeks turned into months. Hearings were scheduled, delayed, rescheduled. Again, Addison's lawyer filed motions asking for extensions, sympathy-based exceptions, anything that might slow the inevitable. During that time, she gave birth to her son. I found out indirectly from a distant cousin who still followed my mother on social media. A boy. I stared at that information longer than I should have. I was an aunt now, and yet I felt nothing but distance. In court filings, they painted me as the villain, the wealthy sister, the heartless woman evicting a struggling new mother. My lawyer responded with facts, ownership percentages, legal precedent, the original demand that had started everything. I never had to attend the hearings myself. The judge ruled based on documents, not drama. Eventually, the order came down. The house was to be sold. A neutral real estate agent was appointed to handle everything. Predictably, my mother and Addison were uncooperative. Viewings were delayed. The house was left cluttered. Doors went unanswered. My lawyer sent another formal warning. Continued obstruction could result in penalties. That finally forced compliance. The house sat on the market for 3 months. It sold for $380,000. After fees, commissions, and closing costs, $345,000 remained, split evenly. When $172,500 hit my bank account, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my couch in my apartment, and breathed. They had to move out before the sale closed. According to the agent, they waited until the last possible day. The house was cluttered, but undamaged. I imagined the chaos, the panic, the anger. I didn't feel joy about it. I felt finality. Today, the money sits in a high-interest savings account while I decide my next steps. Investment, property, freedom. All options I never truly had before. My mother moved in with her sister, temporarily, from what I've heard. It's tense. She tells anyone who will listen that I made my own family homeless. Addison and Walt rented a small apartment far outside the city. I don't know if Walt ever found steady work. The extended family went quiet. No apologies, no explanations, silence. And honestly, the silence is peaceful. I still live in my apartment. It feels like a sanctuary now, a place no one can demand, no one can guilt me out of. This experience didn't just end a housing dispute. It ended an illusion. I learned that boundaries aren't cruelty, that no doesn't require justification, and that sometimes protecting your future means walking away from the people who think they own it. I thought the story ended when the house sold. I was wrong. Because endings don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they arrive quietly, after everything has already burned down. A few weeks after the money hit my account, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Tiffany," a woman said, hesitating. "It's Aunt Carol, my mother's sister." Her voice sounded tired, not angry, not dramatic, just worn down. She didn't call to yell. She didn't call to guilt me. She didn't even mention the house at first. She called to warn me. "She's telling everyone," Aunt Carol said carefully, "that you planned this from the start, that you bought the apartment knowing you'd force the sale, that you wanted the money." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. Apparently, the story had evolved. In this new version, I wasn't just selfish. I was calculating. Cold. A traitor who smiled while making her own family homeless. "And Addison?" I asked quietly. A pause. "She doesn't correct her." That hurt more than I expected. Aunt Carol didn't ask me to fix anything. She didn't ask me to reach out. She just said, "I thought you should know," and then added, almost apologetically, "I don't think she'll ever admit what really happened." After the call, I sat in my apartment for a long time. I realized something then. They didn't just lose the house. They lost the version of me who absorbed blame to keep peace. A month later, something else happened. Addison emailed me. Not a text, not a call. An email. No subject line. Just a few short paragraphs. She said motherhood was harder than she expected. That money went faster than she thought. That stress was overwhelming. That she never meant for things to go so far. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of the cake. No acknowledgement of the demand. No acknowledgement of the harassment. Just exhaustion and expectation. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the email. I didn't reply, because I finally understood something that took me nearly 30 years to learn. Closure doesn't come from explanations. It comes from consistency. Weeks passed, then months. The email stopped. The rumors faded. My life didn't explode into happiness or success overnight. It just stabilized. I focused on work, I slept better. I laughed more easily. I stopped bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. One evening, I stood in my kitchen, keys in my hand, and realized something small but profound. For the first time in my life, no one was waiting to take something from me. No house, no money, no sacrifice. Just silence. And this time, I chose to keep it.